Welcome, Afrodo Reviews here, bringing you another Minor TBR action report. On this channel, as you know, I hope you decide, is that book worth reading over second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? Well, let's decide. This book, to stick close to the rainbow-colored theme that is saturated this month, is a male urban fantasy novel called Brought to Light by author Eliot Grayson. We're going to have a conversation about the trends I've been noticing when it comes to LGBT literature that I've seen over this month, specifically involving female authors writing gay couples, like male gay couples, but not right now. Anyways, this book was published on May 15th of 2023 by Smoking Teacup Books, and I read it on my Amazon Kindle. I'm generally a fan of urban fantasy, which I find to be an underappreciated genre by many. And so, when I saw this on my nightly scroll through the wild wasteland of Kindle Unlimited, its cover was decent enough to catch my eye, and the story seemed interesting when I read the synopsis. So, I clicked that borrow button, dived into it, and about 4 hours of reading later, I have some thoughts. But first, a quick synopsis. The book follows two main characters. The first being Callum, a human hitman who has recently been blackmailed into going after a seemingly harmless coffee shop worker by a group of CIA spooks who flushed him and his handler and are threatening to put him 6 feet under unless he goes through with this. And Lyndon, a fairy who came to this world to hide from the evil Lord Evault by working at a coffee shop, who wants to kill him because Evault heard a prophecy from a seer that the one who brings the light will kill him, which Lyndon fits due to the circumstances around his birth. Callum tries to treat Lyndon as any other mark, but in the end is unable to force himself to go through with killing someone that he can't find a reason would have a hit out on him, being both very young and seemingly innocent. And after a set of circumstances, accidentally gets dragged into the fairy realm with Lyndon. There, after being rescued by Oscar and Casper, two close friends of Lyndon and other fairies, the group travel through the fairy realm, determined to keep Lyndon safe from Evault, and finding it increasingly difficult. And that's about where I'll stop. That's good enough context for what I need to say. Okay, so I know I've said before that a book is too small, that it could have used an additional 50 to 100 pages to really flesh out some of its concepts, that it really didn't give itself time to dive into. Novels are such a wonderful medium because they allow you to take all the time you need to tell the story. A lot of authors like to take advantage of that. Some may get a bit more carried away than others, but that is the beauty of writing, is that this is your story and you can tell it no matter how long it takes to tell. So when I often say that a story could have used another 50 to 100 pages to flesh out its concept, I typically think that there is something there that could have been great, but the authors seem to limit themselves to an artificial limit that they didn't have. I've said this about a few books in the past that needed these extra pages, but I've never felt it more strongly than I did with this specific book. If Brought to Light had 100 or even 150 more pages, this could have been a really engaging urban fantasy story. The elements are all there. You have a good set of characters, a fairy culture that seems interesting to explore, and a story that, while a bit basic and cliche, is tried and true. I didn't even mind the prophecy that much, as the circumstances that fulfilled it was kind of amusingly twisted that I couldn't help but laugh a bit at the end. However, because it was only 187 pages long, it felt more like I was reading a Cliff Notes version of the story, an abridged version if you would. Not something amazing like Dragon Ball Z abridged, but more like the 4Kids One Piece dub, cutting out all the important character arcs and story arcs which reveal a lot about future and current events.
What's that? Daddy, there's a mountain up ahead.
Because of that, it's hard to feel a lot of the emotions that are currently being expected of me to share. Lyndon and Callum are in love, except we don't really see much of their bonding beyond adrenaline bonding. Basically, the two are in constant life-threatening situations together, and Callum protects Lyndon a couple times. Thus, it causes Lyndon and Callum to grow close with all that mushy romance that is all the rage these days. I mean, why bother having a conversation? Why bother being vulnerable with each other when you could just shoot some guys who are threatening him? And, romance started. It even culminates not with a big damn kiss to really cement the two's relationship, but rather Lyndon thinks he's going to expire tomorrow. So he pulls Callum off to the side to make sure his last night is at least fun. But there are elements that a deeper romance was there. For example, Callum, unlike the fairies of this world, can lie to Lyndon, but repeatedly chooses to be truthful even when it comes to hard facts, something that Lyndon clearly appreciates even if he never voices out loud. It's just not enough of that was shown, so that when Callum decides to abandon his life in the mortal realm, hitch it back to fairy world, and live happily ever after, I buy it only because Callum sees this as a step up, rather than he's in love with Lyndon. Speaking of, admittedly, Callum also really suffers from a lack of screen time and development. Callum is not a good person. And while he's a fine character, it's really hard to like Callum at certain points because the development of the character the book keeps hinting at never actually happens. The Callum we start with is an unrepentant killer who doesn't really seem to care about other people, and is shown repeatedly throughout the book. At times, he feels like he only treats Lyndon well because he's attracted to Lyndon, and he bonds with Oscar because Oscar's a fellow soldier, but apart from that, he feels no regret for killing people, has no regret for killing people who were effectively brainwashed, and even at one point admits he finds killing fun. Much of his personal regrets are about himself and who he is and how he's been affected by the choices. He's really just someone who feels like he's only on the good side because he happened to find Lyndon attractive. Otherwise, he would have splattered the little guy's brains all over the concrete otherwise. The book tries to hint that this is mostly a facade that he's convinced himself of, with even the very beginning of the book having Lyndon subject Callum to a magical serum test to determine his goodness effectively. Well, it exactly says that it only tastes good if you have no intent to harm the maker, but still, narratively speaking, it might as well have been the same thing at that point. But since the story never explores this conflicted side of Callum, we never see anything past the facade initially presented, what we get in the end is a remorseless killer who has no character growth and gets to live happily ever after as a noble in a fantastical realm. Yay. But admittedly, character development in this book is kind of skimped out on in general. Oscar and Caspar, the two closest friends to Lyndon, who brave multiple dangers to recover him when he returned to the fairy world, and want to protect him from any threat, as well as a tease that Caspar has feelings for Oscar. Apart from serving as the fellow soldier and the smart mage archetypes, there was really nothing else more to them. Lyndon's mother, who Lyndon is willing to walk into a trap that he knows will probably end him, and is one of the main motivations for much of this book. I think maybe she gets 2 lines of dialogues, gets to glare at Callum when she realizes he took her son to Pound Town, and exists to get beaten to show how bad our baddie really is. Jesse, Callum's main connection to the human realm and the main excuse he has to go back to the human world, despite probably wanting to stay otherwise, gets maybe 2 or 3 pages at the very end where Callum actually interacts with him. And then he comes back with Callum to the fairy world, no questions asked, and seems to be hooking up with the badass Lady Leandon. I think that was her name anyways. I don't want to go back and check, honestly. And Lady Leandon, she's a swordswoman. And that's all I can say on her. And of course we get Avalt, our main bad guy, who gets very little build-up, is nothing more than your standard Dark Lord archetype, who isn't even powerful in the grand scheme of things, because it's repeatedly mentioned that if he does something that would get the attention of the fairy queens and kings, he would just get erased. And when the climax finally does happen, he dies a few paragraphs into the fight. While I actually briefly enjoyed that Grayson played more to the idea that Callum is a hitman, not a white knight, and tries to do away with Avalt in a surprise attack, overall the fight does still literally end in a very disappointing way, twisted amusement aside. The fight is less than a page, if that, and although I find, again, like I said, although I find the fulfillment of the prophecy a bit amusing, it wasn't satisfying apart from that. So I guess overall my point is there was a lot of potential here for an interesting urban fantasy, isekai style novel, but the author only gave themselves 180 pages to write everything, and because of that a lot of the story falls flat. It feels like she made an outline, but instead of filling in the gaps between the main points of the outline, she just wrote in the outline and added a few words to make it seem less like an outline. So I guess in the end, the book for me is about a 5 out of 10. I can't say I wouldn't recommend it to some people. I mean, it's an urban fantasy. It's a quick read. And, you know, if you're looking for a gay urban fantasy, I guess pick it up. I don't think I would really recommend it on an urban fantasy scale or on a, you know, LGBT friendly scale. But if you're looking specifically for a combination of the two, I would say I would recommend this. But I'll probably also say that's because of my lack of experience. My lack of lexicon when it comes to knowing LGBT-friendly urban fantasy stories. Because, I mean, urban fantasy is kind of something that's underappreciated in the beginning with. But with that being said, I mean, does it deserve Mount Doom? No. But it could definitely have used a lot of polishing otherwise, and it didn't get that. So, with that being said, I guess that's all I have to say. Remember, with every book comes an adventure. And every adventure is worth having, even the bad ones.